Hello and welcome to Let's Reconnect. I'm going to be reconnecting with truth using sacred text today. Reconnecting with the mystical truth that is underneath. So we're talking about a deepening and reading with new eyes, fresh eyes. Passage from the New Testament, from the writing of Paul, actually. I'm really taking a risk. I know that Paul triggers a lot of people, including myself. Gets a hard time for being a bit of a misogynist. The thing about Paul to remember is that he was a Pharisee, as Saul, before he had his conversion, and his job was to interpret the law. He was a scholar, a learned teacher, and he would interpret it and tell people what it meant for their daily lives. So he spoke with authority, and that was what was expected of him. And when he had his conversion, he brought that with him through. He was still a teacher, and he could still come across as being a bit bossy, and he was still within his cultural framework of the day, so it was part of his personality. So I hope that you're able to get through that. It means that comes through. There's that flavour does come through in his writing. The exciting thing is, it was his writing. You know, these weren't just stories that were told on by word of mouth and passed on down generations and then written down. We actually have fragments of his letters. So although there is a layer of separation from the original in the translation because of the words that the translators chose and so on, we can still kind of get back to the authentic message, and I find that quite exciting. So I'm trying not to let myself be prejudiced, and I'm trying to get to the mystical truth behind it. I'm hoping that you'll stick with me in it. And I'm also going to be reading from the Gospel of Thomas, which might be less familiar to you. It didn't make it into the Bible, so you won't find it in the Bible in the New Testament, but it is part of the Nag Hammadi library, and I'm referring to scrolls that were found in Egypt in a cave, Nag Hammadi, and they were texts that were sacred texts that were used by the early Christians. And in the West, they got lost. And rumour has it that the early bishops, burnt them. But in the East, Coptic Christians in Egypt and that region, they used them and kept them, and they still cherish them today. So we have another copy that wasn't burned, and we are able to look at those and read them. And I find that fascinating too, because it's interesting to compare and look at similar themes that we find there. And we do find themes relating to light and the incorruptible light versus the corruptible light of the lower regions, the lower heavens, or the world, as Paul refers to the powers and principalities of this dark age, this dark world. So we're going to be thinking about that, in particular about sensitivity of the heart. Because if we want to know real truth and to follow the way of truth, amidst the confusion of the many different versions that are out there, especially now we have YouTube and social media and many means of communication, then there are more and more voices giving more and more versions and narratives, and it can be confusing. So it's always been there's always been chaos and confusion, but it almost seems that it's just compounded. There's just more of it. It's more intense. And so coming to that place of truth is where we find peace and certainty, and it's a heart experience rather than a head experience. Okay, the heart is the vehicle by which we reconnect and stay connected to eternal truth, or the highest truth, the incorruptible light. So that's really where we're going, and I'm going to be looking at a couple of texts. So first of all then, I'll be reading from Paul's letter to the Ephesians, and the little passage is entitled Living as Children of Light. So we've got this theme of light already. Can you see that I've got my candle here burning? Okay, maybe you'd like to look at that while I read these words. So I tell you this, he's being bossy already, and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do, in the futility of their thinking. The futility of their thinking. I've underlined that. We'll come back to that. They are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, due to the hardening of their hearts. That's important. Having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality so as to indulge in every kind of impurity with a continual lust for more. So here we have more stuff that could trigger us, because we think, here we go again, it's, hammering the church and Paul and hammering about, sexuality, because we normally would associate those words, sensuality and impurity and lust, with sexuality and sexual immorality. I'm not saying that it's not that. I do know that you can't separate out sexuality from intimacy, and that can be a place of wounding, so it can be a place of vulnerability. But the church's obsession with sex has almost been a way of obscuring any deeper meaning, so that we just take it at face value as meaning that, and we're not looking for the deeper meaning. And I know that there is one. We are into this deepening, enriching, and I think that the sensuality, you see, is a reference to the senses. And so the senses are the means by which we perceive this reality. We can only perceive this 3D reality that we're in this mind-body complex that we call a human being, that we are in our incarnation. We are limited in our understanding of reality by the 5 senses. And we can never escape that. Not here, not while we're here. And it's almost as if a filter is put on there. So it's like, we might call it a veil. The Bible calls it a veil, don't we? How we'll see face to face. One day we'll see God face to face. We'll be beyond the veil. But the veil that is put on us is this body that we enshrine ourselves in. I'm getting tingles, so I'm touching on truth. I know that when I get tingles around my head here, I'm touching on truth. It's almost as if it's a bodysuit that we wear, like a cloak we put on, like a veil, and then we perceive through the glasses of the 5 senses, okay? And our physical sensorium almost entraps us. Now, this idea of being trapped is very much a Gnostic idea. It comes from Gnostic teaching, but it isn't that people are trapped on earth so much as that God is trapped. We are sparks of the divine. The divine came and incarnated, and then as God, we are trapped, and we need to find our way home back to the throne, back to source, which is the place of incorruptible light. But this lower region is one that is corrupt. And that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? It makes a lot of sense because we see it and we know it. It's our experience. This life is subject to corruption and corruptibility. We see it in nature that everything's decaying and falling. They call it entropy, don't they? That the laws of this world. But it is the same in terms of the mind and duality, and the mythology and the Bible teaching, the religious stories talk about the fallen angels. So we have powers, thought forms, archetypes. The Gnostics call it the archons. Paul calls them the rulers, the powers and principalities of this dark age, this dark world. And so we begin to see there are similarities in Paul's writing and in Gnostic texts. And generally the theme is that we are limited in our understanding. There's a sort of ceiling on how far we can go with our minds and with our thinking. Gnosticism, I'm just reminded actually that Gnosticism means knowledge, but it's a different kind of knowledge. It's not a knowledge from the mind, from understanding with the head. It's a heart knowledge through direct experience of the divine. So we're talking about the intimacy of the heart. So let's just, in view of what I've said, I'm just going to go back to what I read. They are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them. Ignorance, again, something that Gnosticism is, that it's ignorance that keeps you in darkness and that prevents you from pushing through, piercing through the ceiling of this world and getting back to the higher heavens. Ignorance that is, and why? What is ignorance? Due to the hardening of their hearts. The hardening of their hearts. That really struck home with me, when I read that, because I thought it's almost telling us that when we listen to someone who's telling us truth, how do we know if their version of truth is right or not? Is a true version of truth? Because of the heart. Is there compassion and love in what they're saying? Or is it an ideology that has caused a hardening of heart so that the cause becomes more important than compassion, love, and unity consciousness? And it's as simple as that. It really is as simple as that anybody who claims to bring truth but who is preaching hate or who is preaching division, who is pointing out who the enemy is, who we need to be wary of, who we need to avoid, if we get rid of them, we can get to truth and we can all live in peace and everything will be fine. There's a hardening of the heart, and it comes from believing the stories of this dark world, and the world is one that is ruled by the invisible rulers of this world. So these aren't people. We're not talking about people. We're talking about patterns. Jung would call them archetypes that just repeat and repeat through generations, down through the centuries, and they keep us repeating these patterns. If we look back in history, we can see it, but we don't seem to learn from it. So we just keep doing it, and then we're just being puppets for the archons, playthings for the gods. And we never break through to really remembering who we are. And who we are is God. Who we are is one. There's only one self, one of us here on this planet. And as long as we stay in the ignorance of the idea of separation and division, we'll continue fighting against each other. And so we are locked in ignorance. And the only way we set ourselves or God, because it's really the same thing, free, is to pierce through the veil of ignorance and remember that we're one and go back to that heart place where we can't harbour or hold on to hardness that allows us to have an enemy, to be separate, to hate other people. So, having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality. So that the sensuality that I'm thinking of isn't sexual sensuality, it's the sensorium, the limitation of the sensorium, the senses. And it's the senses that makes us appear to be separate. So that that convinces us that that's reality. And to indulge in every kind of impurity with a continual lust for more. So we're talking about the addictiveness, the culture wars recruit because there's something in us, in our lower nature, that loves to fight, that loves having the enemy, loves to be self-righteous, loves to believe we're in the right camp, the right tribe, and loves the drama, and is addicted to the drama. And if you told people you had to give up your hate, they'd struggle. We want more of it. We enjoy the gossip. We want to go and see the latest video about the person we follow who tells us who to hate and why they're bad and what they're up to now. It's very exciting, but it's we're at war with ourselves, and we're never going to find real peace. We just become more and more indignant, angry, because I think what they'll try to do to us is, and I'm talking about the archons, the gods, if you want to think that. I'm not talking about individual people, but what these powers are doing is stirring us up to enjoy the fight, and they kind of weaponize us, and so we get more and more angry, and then our anger has to be assuaged through our being somehow vindicated, and we're fighting for justice, we're fighting for freedom, but we're fighting. That's the point. We're fighting, and it's divisive, and it'll just keep happening. It doesn't almost matter what the cause is. You can almost forget what the cause is, because it can change from week to week. And I see this when I watch the news, and I see there, that the contradictions when politicians and so they do U-turns, but then they'll tell you who it is this week that you're hating and why. And as long as we keep the hate going, it doesn't really matter what the cause is. That can be interchangeable. But still, we don't see it. Still, we don't wake up, and we go along with it. So sensitivity of heart versus sensuality or sensorium, sense perception. That seems to be the dichotomy that is being set up here. And we have this dichotomy is light or truth on the one hand against darkness and falsehood or ignorance on the other hand. I've drawn a little notes. So I've got a dichotomy: light, darkness. It says truth, falsehood. Truth here is heart. Can you see my little picture of a heart? And on the other side, a head. In other words, head thinking. The mind. The mind, which is always going to be informed through sense perception. And then the light is a heart sensitivity, love and compassion. And that's where we find purity, and that's where we find freedom, as opposed to the hardening of the heart. The hardening of the heart, when we listen to the lies, the deceiver, the falsehood, and then we are running the program of corruption, where it's the incorruptible light. Even if we think that they're on the side of light, it's not the incorruptible, it's a corruptible light. Okay, it's impure, because the purity is the place of love. And you come to a ceiling. This has become really I've understood this in a new way recently, and it makes so much sense that if you hit a ceiling if you're holding on to the enemy, to duality. Duality will always hit a ceiling, and this is what religions always work by. This the religions of this world work by a duality, and the purity is the unity, which will take you above that ceiling, what we call the lower heavens or the higher heavens. Let's see what else. Yeah, and the impure and the corrupted is lust. And I've put the word addiction because there is a continual lust for more. We want more. We think of lust maybe as, as I say, being about sex, or addiction being about substances and so on. But addiction can come in many forms, and it can be addiction to the culture wars, to the actual drama. Okay, so the solution, and carrying on reading. Oh, no, I'm going to come back to that in a moment, actually, because I want to just read from the Book of Thomas. So I'm going to come back to the solution, which is when Paul goes on. Actually, I will read this now because it just makes sense to follow it on. However, did not come to know Christ that way. Surely you heard of him and were taught in him accordance with the truth that is in Jesus. You were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. Therefore, and listen to this, therefore each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to his neighbour, for we are all members of one body. And speak truthfully to his neighbour because we are all members of one body. So the solution is an awareness of unity consciousness. And I've often said before that my understanding now, as I come with fresh eyes to the Bible, is that Christ means it doesn't refer to the person Jesus alone. That's not the mystical reading of the Bible. When it talks about Christ, it's talking about unity consciousness. Christ is unity consciousness. Okay, so I am just going to read now from the Book of Thomas. And passage reads, Again the Saviour answered and said, This is why we must speak to you, because this is the teaching for the perfect. If you wish to become perfect, keep these sayings. If not, the name for you is ignorant, since an intelligent person cannot associate with a fool. The intelligent person is perfect in all wisdom, but to the fool good and evil are the same. The wise person will be nourished by truth, and will be like a tree growing by the stream of water. Some people have wings but rush towards visible things that are far from truth. Visible things that are far from truth. So back to what we think we see in the world in this 3D reality, and we are limited by sense perception. The fire that guides them, talking about the lust, okay, the desires, the fire that guides them gives them an illusion of truth. It will shine on them with a perishable beauty. So yeah, it seems attractive, but that attractive is perishable. And it will imprison them in dark delight and capture them in sweet smelling pleasure. And it will make them blind with insatiable desire, inflame their souls, passion, indignation, freedom fighters, inflame their souls and be like a stake that is jammed into their heart and can never be removed. Like a bit in the mouth, it leads them according to its own wish. So I suppose it's a warning that there's an agenda, and the agenda is always there, although it might be hidden, and it's always a worldly agenda. Okay, and I thought that there was such a comparison. I really thought that those two speak to each other, and you see those same themes. And so therefore each of you must put off falsehood, speak truthfully, for we are all members of one body. We are all members of one body. That's the main lesson, the main teaching, and a reminder that what we think we know in this world, whatever we hear and see, that creates a response in us to perhaps just stop and think. I certainly do this now more, that I'm being played, I'm being manipulated by the archons, by the thought forms, by the archetypes, by the patterns that repeat. And am I going to go along with that? Or am I going to go back to the heart and reconnect to truth there? Because that's the truth that I trust. And if I find myself being defined by who I dislike or who I'm against, who I stand against, then I need to re-examine that belief, that ideology, that faith system that is teaching me that way, because it's not the higher truth, it's not of the incorruptible light, and that's what I want to choose. So I hope that was helpful. I hope that it spoke to you in some way. If it did, please let me know in the comments. And I just want to close with the prayer that Dr. Hewlin left us, the peace of I. Peace be with you, all my peace, the peace that is I, the peace that is I am, the peace for always, now and forever and evermore. My peace I give to you, my peace I leave with you, not the world's peace, but only my peace, the peace of I. Amen. Thank you for listening. See you next time. God bless.